Hi, my name is Gina Porter, and I am the math specialist here at Rock Prairie Elementary. And for the next few minutes, we're going to talk about the early childhood math here on campus, kindergarten, pre-K, and Head Start, and the number topics that they'll be covering in math during the second 9 weeks. So here's an overview of the second 9 weeks in early childhood math. They begin the 9 weeks talking about 2D and 3D shapes. Then they move into the number topics that we're about to discuss. And then they finish that 9 weeks right before the winter holidays talking about measurement. So in the number topics, one of the most important pieces is the ability to count forwards and backwards to at least 20 with and without objects. So let's talk about counting forwards. They don't always have to start with 1. You might say, can you start counting for me at 7 until I tell you to stop? And so they're going to start off 7, 8, 9, 10 until you tell them to stop. You might ask, why do we want them to do this? Think about when they're going to start adding later, and maybe we ask them to add 7 plus 3. We don't want them to have to start counting from 1. Eventually, we want them to be able to start counting at 7 and count forward 3 spots, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's why we're developing this skill of being able to count from any number. Although obviously they need to be able to count to 20, and then we start asking them to count from other numbers after they can successfully count from 1 to 20. Additionally, we're going to ask them to count backwards, and just like where they don't always have to start with 1 to go forwards, they don't have to start with 20 to go backwards. You might say, can you count backwards for me starting at 18? 18, 17, 16, 15. If they start at 18 and start going forwards, 18, 19, you can just stop them and say, you're counting forwards. Can you count backwards for me? And again, this ties into later when they're doing subtraction. You know, the beginning subtraction, we're doing a backwards number count. So we are giving them skills that they're going to need later. They can count just verbally, or they can count a set of objects. Maybe you have a bag of beans. That's a cheap and easy thing for them to count. Or maybe you have a bunch of Legos laying around the house and you just lay a set of Legos on the table and ask them to count them. Obviously, if they're counting a set of objects, they are going to start with 1. They also need to be able to recite numbers up to 100, beginning with any given number. So this is rote counting. It's just the number sequence, not about counting objects. And since in this one, we're going beyond 20, then they are counting just forwards. We only ask them to count backwards within 20. And also, this is not about counting objects. We're not going to give them a set of 100 objects and ask them to count that many objects. Once they're successful at counting from 1 to 100, then we can start asking them to begin with any number. For instance, start counting at 34 until I ask you to stop. 34, 35, 36, till you ask them to stop. Again, this is going to be an important skill that they're going to call on later when they're working on things in future grade levels. We also want them to read, write, and represent numbers to 20 with or without pictures. And so this can take a lot of different avenues. One of them is that we could just show them a number and ask them, what number is this? So you could have a card with a number on it or just write it on a piece of paper and just ask them to tell you the name of that number. You could show them a piece of paper that has multiple numbers, for instance, 14, 12, and 11, and ask them, which one of these is 11? And they can point at it and tell you this one is 11. So this is recognizing the number. We can also ask them to just write the numbers for us. Give them a piece of paper. Please write the number 13 for me, or please write the number 19 for me. And again, we're only going up to 20 here in this particular set of objectives. So we're not going to ask them to write 65 or ask them to write 89, just 0 to 20. We could show them some objects. It could be either pictures, like these pictures of circles, or you could place, a set of objects like beans or Legos or whatever you have around the house, and ask them to count them and write down how many objects you see. For instance, write how many circles you see. They would count them, and then they could write the symbol, the number, the numeral for 5. You could also give them a set of objects or some pictures of objects and just ask them to count the circles and tell you verbally how many objects there are. And one of the things you may have to work with them on when they're counting objects or pictures is the ability to have one-to-one correspondence. That means for each object, I say one number word. A lot of times when kids begin counting, they just rattle off the number sequence and without regards to whether the number corresponds to an item or not. You could also lay a set of objects on the table and ask them for just a part of that set. For instance, there are obviously more than 8 here. You might ask them to hand you 8 of these. So then you're looking to see, can they stop at 8? Do they know that when they say 8, that is 8 objects? So you can give them more than they need and ask them to count out a subset and hand it to you. You might ask them to draw 10 objects. It could be lines, happy faces. Keep it something simple, but to draw a specific number of objects. Now, once they can count a set and they can have started recognizing numbers and writing numbers, we can start asking them to create or generate a set that is less than, more than, or equal to a given number up to 20. Kindergarten, early childhood works a lot with numbers within 20. For instance, you could tell them, here's a set of 12 counters. Can you make a set that has more than 12 counters? Or can you make a set that has less than 12 counters? Or can you make another set that has 12 counters? And so you can actually ask them to count out items, or you can ask them to draw a set that has more than, less than, or equal to a given number. While you're working on that, you're also having them compare sets of up to 20 using comparative language. And by that, I mean we actually want them to use the words, this set has more than the other set. This set has less than, or this set is equal to the other set. So for instance, we could show them these 2 sets, the blue triangles and the red triangles, and ask them which set has more items in it. And they can tell you the red set has more triangles than the blue set. We want the students to use those words, more than, less than, equal to. And so they can compare sets that you make. They can compare sets that they make. But again, the emphasis is on getting them to think about those words and use those words in regard to things that they're seeing. We also want them to compose and decompose numbers up to 10. And basically what that means is compose is where we're putting sets together to make a given number. And decompose is to take a given number and separate it in kindergarten into 2 sets, later into multiple sets maybe. So an example of composing is to give them a set of 4 counters and a set of 3 counters and ask them, how many counters do we have if we put these together? Or here is a set of 5 counters. How many counters would we need to add so that we have 8? To decompose, you might say, here is a set of 10 counters. Can you make 2 sets with these counters? And how many counters are in each of your groups? Then maybe you could push them back together and say, can you make 2 different sets? Maybe you had 10 and you split it into 5 and 5. Talk about that, then push them back together and say, can you decompose them a different way? Can you take them apart a different way? And maybe this time they have a set of 3 and a set of 7. Composing and decomposing numbers, being able to take them apart and put them together in different ways is a really essential skill for success in math. Well, thank you for listening. If you have any questions or want to talk about any of this, you're welcome to contact me. That's my email address on the screen, jporter@csisd.org, or you can call the school and ask for me. And we're going to have a Math for Parents for the third 9 weeks on Thursday, January 5th here at the school, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for listening.